We've defeated Dvalin, 2 of our fellow Harbingers, and 1 of the 7 Archons, but today we faced our toughest battle yet, 4 separate Pyro Abyss Mages. I asked my community tab if you guys would prefer this episode to include both the Chasm Delvers quest and the Dainsleif Quest, or only the Dainsleif Quest. Pretty overwhelmingly, you chose to include both, so, as woman of the people, both it is. I more or less decided that if I had to go through all of the suffering for the sake of content, then I want to maximize my viewership. Those with some memory of the Halfdan quest, more specifically the enemies we face, will probably immediately recognize why. But if you don't, well, you'll find out soon enough. If you don't want to see the Chasm Delvers quest in this video, the bar down below will have the starting point for the Dainsleif quest. Feel free to skip ahead. With all of that out of the way, let's begin. We arrive in the chasm and meet a specialist from the Ministry of Civil Affairs who directs us to find Jiqiang, an adventurer with the chasm exploration team. Editing Ren here. Despite my best efforts, I butchered her name so badly in every single take that I'm just going to put the YouTube recording of how to pronounce it over anytime I try to say it in the video. Happens to the best of us. She informs us that in order to safely navigate the underground areas of the chasm, we need to use the adjuvant created from Lumenstone, which means absolutely nothing to me, but we just go with it. The mining warehouse it was located in was supposed to be guarded by someone, but instead we find a bunch of treasure hoarders. Yeah, that sounds about right. After defeating the treasure hoarders, we obtain the Lumenstone and return to find out the garden question was Jiqiang. This is going to be a long quest, isn't it? In order to destroy the bedrock keys, we need to obtain Geograna from these jagged rocks. Unfortunately, as a polearm, it's easier said than done. The good news is at least now I know I won't have to do this with Wanderer or Mualani. Eventually, I realized plunging is pretty effective in shattering the jagged rocks versus using Arlecchino's scythe as a comedically large pickaxe. Hello? Once we break the first bedrock key, we're given a map to find 3 more. Unfortunately, breaking the bedrocks requires a bit of puzzle solving, which is not my strong suit. This is your warning. Honestly, I have no idea where this last one came from. Off to the next one, I guess. For those who either have an IQ above 50 or completed the Dainsleif Quest after 4.3, you might be wondering, or maybe already commented asking, why I'm doing the Chasm Delvers quest when it's not required. Well, the last time I played this quest, and honestly the last time I went to the chasm at all, was prior to the release of Sumeru. At the time, to trigger the start of the Dainsleif quest, we had to unlock a section of the lower level of the chasm by doing the Chasm Delvers quest. So I assumed that's what I had to do this time. This was the first of 2 terrible assumptions. The second, once you complete What Will Be Reunited, the interlude chapter Act 2, Perilous Trail, shows up in your quests. It tells you that, in order to unlock the quest, you have to complete the following: a teapot to call home, Ito Story Quest Act 1, Acts 1 and 2 of the Raiden Shogun Story Quest, and a section of the Chasm Delvers World Quest. I thought this was the Dainsleif Quest because I didn't remember any other major quests occurring in the chasm. I mean, come on, does this description not sound like we run into Dainsleif? I don't know at what point I realized Perilous Trail was the quest with Yelan, Zhao, and Ito, probably when the actual Dainsleif Quest appeared after Inazuma, but I didn't even find out that you no longer need to complete part of the Chasm Delvers quest until I was writing this script. All of this time, I honestly thought Perilous Trail was an event quest because of how it was released during 2.7. Because of that, I started the Chasm Delvers quest and did a teapot to call home before starting Act 3 of Inazuma, so I didn't see the real Dainsleif quest, or the auto-unlocked waypoint. Oops. Eventually, I plan to do videos completing the interlude quest since there won't be much else to do while we wait for Snezhnaya to fully release. When I do that video, I'll include a summary of parts 1 through 3 of the Chasm Delvers quest, and then complete parts 4 through 6 in a bit more detail. Well, probably. For this one, all of the Geograna are luckily in locations that are easy to plunge to. Honestly, it took more effort to defeat the Geoslimes than it did to break the bedrock. Unfortunately, I saved the worst for last because it's an extra complicated puzzle. Not only did it take an embarrassing amount of attempts to hit this middle one at the right time and angle, but for the final piece, we get dragged into a secondary quest with the Millith who are disguised as treasure hoarders. Well, we find that out after we, beat them up. I didn't have to continue or finish this quest, but I do have to sit through a very long dialogue scene. You'd think I'd be used to this by now. As it turns out, that was not the last bedrock key, so we head much deeper into the upper level of the chasm to find the real last one. At least, I hope. The final bedrock lacks room to plunge on the Geograna, which means it takes much longer to shatter them. Additionally, monsters literally fall from the sky, because of course they do. After taking a humbling amount of time to defeat the 2 hatchlings, their mom shows up. This one was a bit easier, somehow, and finally we can destroy the final bedrock and open up the mining area of the chasm. It's time to head underground. Before continuing onward, I ended up deciding to go back to Inazuma and completed Act 3 of the Archon quest. At this point, the Dainsleif quest is properly unlocked. Despite that, I still didn't notice it and continued the Chasm Delvers quest. How tragic. Returning underground, Junwoo tasks us with finding some clues about Uncle He, a senior miner who disappeared and has been presumed dead. We find some clues, collect some lumen spars we can actually see, and beat up a bunch of monsters before returning to base camp.
You're in the dark. I tell you what, Sherlock Holmes, you are unbelievable.
We're asked to go find
机场
and once we catch up with her, she asks us for our help with taking photos of anomalies so she can finish working on her map of the mines, or something. Honestly, my brain tunes it out when the quests aren't voiced, so... At the site of the first anomaly, we take a photo and then get ambushed by my mortal enemy, a pyro abyss mage. As it turns out, the first of many. The hydro abyss mage it was with wasn't particularly difficult to defeat, but the first attempt at defeating the pyro abyss mage went less smoothly. After a brief training montage of leveling up my talents and artifacts, we returned for our vengeance.
It's payback time.
Successful on our second attempt, barely, we continue onward to a campsite taken over by treasure hoarders. After defeating them, we notice someone's trapped in a cage. For the sake of my monetization, I'm not even gonna try to say his name. We'll just call him C. After we successfully find the trapped man, it's time to search for the second camp taken over by treasure hoarders. Hopefully this one doesn't also have a questionably named NPC. Luckily, no trapped NPCs this time, but they do have a giant cannon. At this point, nothing surprises me. We go look for some cannonballs, but unfortunately the storage room is locked and requires 2 different keys. I'm sure finding 2 keys in this giant semi-abandoned mine won't be a hassle at all. Back at base camp, we ask Jinwoo for information about the keys. Luckily, she has a general idea of where to find them. We avoid alerting the nearby treasure hoarders and find the first key after breaking every single other jar in the area. For the second key, there is no avoiding the treasure hoarders, so we clear them out, accidentally blow ourselves up, and find the second key. Returning to the storage room, we get ambushed by some geoslimes, clean up the, poison goo, and find our cannonballs. Unfortunately, the fuses are completely useless. After a super long explanation on how explosives work in Teyvat, C tells us he can make replacement fuses, which would have been nice to start with. Our job is to get him the ingredients for unmoving essential oil. What are the ingredients? Core lapis and frogs. The core lapis is easy for me to get. The shop in Liyue sells some, and I only needed 1 anyways. The frog, though, I went to just about every body of water in Liyue and Mondstadt looking for frogs. It took me an hour. I truly regret every frog I've ever passed by now. We finish the new fuses, install them in the cannonballs, and
机场
returns with an updated map for us to use. We return to the site of the cannon and have to solve another puzzle in order to actually use it. After my brain spent way too long buffering trying to understand what was needed, I just kind of winged it and managed to be correct. At least I have somewhat good luck. After we blow some stuff up, we head further in through the newly unlocked path and reach the point that, prior to 4.3, was necessary to unlock the Dainsleif Quest. However, since as of recording this, we are in 5.1, everything that I just did was completely unnecessary. What did we learn today? That I need to start utilizing Google. We return to Liyue and go talk to Catherine, and oh man, am I so glad to have a voiced quest again. At Catherine's direction, we go meet the commissioner, who shares that there's been strange happenings involving hilichurls in the mines. The hilichurls seem to be in a daze, focused only on entering the depths of the mines, and then never coming back out. It's freaking out the miners, and our task is to investigate why this is happening. Despite Paimon's apprehension, we accept the commission and head into the depths of the mines. A teleport waypoint automatically unlocks, and yet somehow it never crossed my mind that I wasted all of that time doing the previous world quest. Go figure. After teleporting, we're immediately face to face with the inverted city. Dainsleif suddenly stumbles out of an abyss portal and explains the last time we saw him, he wasn't able to catch up with our twin.
Whatever happened to the eye of the first field tiller?
You know, every time the eye of the first field tiller is brought up, all I can think about is a tweet I saw once comparing Dane to that one Lin-Manuel Miranda photo. We learn a little about Dainsleif's past and decide to investigate the abyss activity within the chasm together. As we approach the inverted city, we're cut off by some Black Serpent Knights. Though, as you can see, I leveled Arlecchino up to 70, but didn't do the AR-35 Ascension domain, so all the enemies are still much lower level. I take the wins where I can get them at this point. I don't even need to increase my adventure rank until Fontaine, so I'll probably just stay at AR-35 until then. Huh. That's probably a concern. Not for right now, though. After getting ambushed by more Black Serpent Knights, we beat them up and head upstairs. Downstairs? And find more Black Serpent Knights. Honestly, maybe they're the same ones. Who knows anymore? We defeat them, again, and find out they were hiding some hilichurls. Dainsleif explains that these hilichurls are near their end, but before he can elaborate, not that we really need elaboration on what the end means, the Black Serpent Knights have recovered and are ready for round, 4, I think? Is this how Signora felt when I kept coming back after getting pummeled repeatedly? This time, instead of attacking us, a definitely different Black Serpent Knight arrives and evidently orders the rest to retreat and leave us alone. At least he knows when to take the L and move on. Dainsleif seems to recognize the knight, suddenly blurting out the name Halfdan, and after they leave, he shares with us some Conrio lore that honestly makes me not want to ever hurt a hilichurl ever again. for like 10 minutes because I still need their drops, so I'll just close my eyes like I do when I fight the Saurians. Led by this cool Sealy, we head deeper into the inverted city. As we make our way into the center, we disturb more dying hilly churls by approaching with our adjuvant that probably feels a bit like LED headlights. My bad. Finally, in the center room, we find a water pool, which is also upside down, and nobody seems remotely phased, so I guess we just go with it. Dainsleif explains a bit about the curse the people of Conria have suffered, and notes that the water in the pool seems to be acting as a temporary relief. Most of the Dainsleif quests can be briefly summarized as just intensive lore drops that simultaneously get us closer and further from our twin. While I could go more in depth on the lore, I tend to be distracted by Dainsleif during these quests and have to go look up explanations after. Oops. Halfdan appears before us again, this time trying to get us to follow him. Where? Down into the poison goo. Of course. Lovely. Continuing deeper in, we find a Geoslime, and to be honest, behind the Pyro Abyss Mages, these guys are definitely among the top 3 for my most hated enemies in this challenge. Yeah, I think I'm all set. We follow Halfdan into a hilly trail camp, which is pretty much just full of corpses. Thanks. After investigating a few key areas of the camp and getting very depressed thanks to Paimon's out loud thoughts, we approach Dainsleif, who's standing in front of some probably dead hilly churls and a flower. Dainsleif explains that the flower in question is the Intivad, which we know is the flower Lumine has in her hair. Since I picked Lumine as my traveler on my main account, this was my first time seeing this scene from the Aether point of view. I feel like this was the final point that the story started completely pushing forward with Aether as the canon traveler. The explanation, or, well, lack thereof, for Lumine always felt a little confusing to me, and seeing this version, it makes much more sense.
Save your strength for something worth saving.
With wise words from Dainsleif, we leave the hilly trail camp and get flashbanged by the inverted city. An Abyss Herald, or, well, actually, I think it's the same one we've beaten up before, appears, so now it's time to fight. It's much easier to fight him this time, but we do have to fight both phases properly again instead of just the first phase like we did for most of We Will Be Reunited. Luckily for us, though, vaporizing does wonders. We return to the water pool, this time finding an Abyss Lector. At least we get variety now. Before we fight the Abyss Lector, it's time for part 1 of the cutscene that always makes me cry every single time I see it.
Halfdan, don't do it!
After a lot of we defeat the Abyss Lector. Now it's time to deactivate the 4 devices. I wish I could express how much I hated this part, but if I did, I would probably get demonetized. In my first video, and actually in the second one too, I got a ton of comments explaining that I can remove the Bond of Life by using her burst. And yes, I do know that now. The problem with the Pyro Abyss Mages is if I don't have my burst almost completely charged, it's virtually impossible to get it charged the rest of the way. That usually isn't a problem, but well, you'll see why this became an issue later. After what felt like hours of fighting this thing, I finally broke the shield and wiped it out with my skill. With one device deactivated, it's time to move on and find the next one. We arrive at the next one, and oh no. I didn't even get a chance to charge my burst before getting knocked out by the stupid Electro Mage. This is what I was referencing earlier. Fun fact, if you die during this part of the quest, you have to completely restart. That one device I deactivated, gotta do it again. The second time around, I pretty much just decided I would deal with the other Abyss Mages first, and then handle the Pyro Abyss Mages last, after I could charge my burst and remove the Bond of Life. After another unholy amount of time I will never get back, I made the same mistake the second time and used my skill, entering the Mask of the Red Death state. I figure the Pyro Abyss Mages can't be in every single room, so I'll just go to another device and deal with the other Pyro Abyss Mage last. I hope you all understand why I felt I needed to put this in a video all of its own. Well, at least one room was free of misery. It's time to rip the band-aid off and do my least favorite task, fight the Pyro Abyss Mages. Turns out, if you leave the area before defeating both of them, they both respawn, even if you did defeat one of them already. So much fun. We can add that to the amount of time wasting I did for this one single quest, I guess. I developed a bit of a strategy around halfway through, so minus quickly losing what was left of my sanity, we managed it pretty okay. After 20 minutes of my life I will never get back, we finally defeat all of the Abyss Mages and deactivate the 4 devices. Back at the waterfall, we find Dainsleif and cry. Well, I cried anyways, while Dainsleif is reunited with Halfdan.
Huh? Light?
apologies, Captain Dainsleif, Twilight Sword. Back then, I failed you, and failed to protect our people.
No. For 500 years, you have faithfully done your duty. To this day, I am proud of you all.
Khaenri'ah didn't fall, did it? Since you're still here.
Correct. So, no need to revive the homeland.
Honestly, now I've just accepted every time Dainsleif shows up in this game, I'm probably gonna cry. Having discovered the truth of the Hilichurls, our commission is technically satisfied. We say our goodbyes to Dainsleif, and our quest in the chasm is finally complete. Up next for Arlecchino, the Nation of Wisdom, Sumeru. But that'll come in the next installment. I hope you all enjoyed this not-so-little bonus video. Like I said, I plan to eventually do more side videos completing world quests and other interlude chapters with Arlecchino and my other solo accounts once the main Archon quests are completed through Natlan. If you haven't already, make sure you like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.